drawing. Let me just put a few more in. I've structured it. It's sort of from about the year 1000, but it's structured around Chinese ink drawing, painting, Renaissance, Baroque, and modern. So it's a sort of survey. But what I thought we'd do is, I mean, obviously these are the main concepts that I thought were at hand. So trace, sketch, line, copy, depiction, form, figuring, graffiti, gestural, inscription, condensation, mediation, diagram, calligraphic, plan, process, observation, and mark. I hope these words actually resonate with some of the drawings, or with most of the drawings. Drawing is the process of mediating what is first absence, and then it charts its passage into presence. In this sense, it's a form of techne. Techne is seeing in advance of appearance and anticipation. It becomes a root word of technology with logos. But formerly in the Greek, it was the production into presence. But it's linked to poiesis and the idea of going from absence into presence in such a way whereby the memory of absence, there not being, is retained. So I wanted to start off with the longest surviving tradition. I mean, we call it drawing, but painting, ink painting. This is Northern Sung, Early Spring by Guo Xi. And it's the relationship between, I mean, in a way, Chinese painting configures the relationship between poetry, calligraphy, and painting. Let someone in. It's a process which is irreversible. Once the mark is made, there's no erasure. So it's different from Western-based drawing, in which erasure is incorporated into the process of construction. In Chinese painting, there's no erasure. It starts from the idea of emptiness or nothing, not being, and moves into presence or into the visible. So you get a constant play between what's invisible and what's visible. The idea is, in Chinese painting, that this play between the invisible and the visible is a kind of form of breath resonance. So the first criteria in judging painting is that there's a feeling of movement. It's a play of also mind and matter. And it's also energetics and vision. So the landscape is explored by walking in the landscape and recording the energetic lines within the landscape, the ley lines, let's call it, or chi lines. So there's a link between the pictorial and the poetic dimensions of prediction. And it's the longest unbroken tradition in the world in terms of aesthetic. This is Mi Fu, who's again Northern Sung, the three friends. And the stamps, the red stamps, the various collectors who've owned the painting. This is an artist called Lan Kai. Why I think this is an interesting drawing is that He was known as Madman Liang, and was to exert profound influence on Zen paintings. He was he often got drunk and painted when he was drunk. He was known for his splashed ink style of brushwork, which opened out the whole process of mark making. In this case, the portrayal of human figure becomes a mode of action image in which marks are alive with movement. So literally, ink would be splashed and the figure would start to emerge out of that. There wouldn't be a predetermined image which was fixed. It came out of the process of letting the ink run and letting the ink move. So this is the beginnings really of Zen painting, which moved to China. We moved to Japan later, so it went from being Chan Buddhist painting to being Zen. But again, this rhythmical sense of the movement image and this close relationship to calligraphy. So the sense of the movement of the brush and the movement of the mind is connected in a profound way. The sort of rhythm of things. It's not just the depiction. It's not got a predetermined schema. Emerges out of the marks. Is the Yuan dynasty, which is 1340s. This is when the Mongols took over China. Just as a brief interlude, there was if you ever go to the Topkapi Museum in Istanbul, there's these wonderful drawings which only come from the 15th century. They come from nowhere and go nowhere. No one knows what the social basis of the artists was. They're probably shamanic in their origin, but they incorporate ink painting with a sort of sense of Central Asian. They're mysterious. It could be related to shamanism or a forgotten presentation of occult practices. So moving into the early Renaissance, this is Uccello. He worked out the main principles of perspective in the 15th century with the development of technical drawings. So we get a shift from the Chinese non-mimetic calligraphic tradition of drawing to this more almost technological relationship to the mimetic and in terms of perspective, and in terms of a way of measuring space. It's Mantegna, the 15th century. Mantegna produced a vast range of graphical work that combines the influence of sculptural and ideal depiction combined with naturalistic elements. So a lot of the drawing was done from looking at Greek and Roman sculpture, and a lot of the geometry came from with the revival of Greek and Roman classicism. But the Renaissance started to welcome in a sort of a naturalistic, realistic element as well into drawing. So again, it's Mantegna. The subject matter is clearly pagan. So these portraits, did anyone talk about these three portraits by Michelangelo? So it's high Renaissance. Why do they look like they look? No one can work it out.
Is that Medusa? Middle.
Looks as if it could be. So
Are you asking about what do we know about them, or
what do you know about them, or why do they look like they look? What are you looking at?
question? The far right one looks a bit like a camera obscura.
Yeah, I doubt that Michelangelo used camera obscura.
Okay. I don't really know. So,
I mean, so in command of drawing, it wouldn't have come. It wouldn't have. The use of a lens wouldn't have occurred to him.
I would say it's got a classic element of drawings of contrast, bit of the space, light and shadow, the highlight, darkness gives the 3D feeling, especially the one in the middle. It's almost like the face has that around the cheek is that upper part of face have that rendering of almost sculpture.
So there's a relationship to sculpture.
Is that head of Cleopatra?
I just, to be honest, I just took it from a whole series of drawings.
They just look like they're studies for characters in his paintings. Like
yeah,
the one on the right, I recognize.
They prefigure paintings, so they're actually actively going in search of a relationship to. I mean, he did both small drawings and cartoons, which it's a huge drawing in the British Museum. And they used to pinprick the outlines of the drawing and use this as a template for the painting.
it looks quite Northern Renaissance. The right hand one.
Yeah, but in fact, it's Florence.
Yeah.
They used charcoal, didn't they? These are charcoal drawings.
Mm.
And they're all looking at the same direction.
Let's move on.
Why did you choose them, Jonathan?
I thought they were typical typical portraits, which were not based on everyday life. They're based on ideal forms and poetic, a sort of certain relationship to poetry, and so kind of almost a dream space, so a space of otherness, so as if they were noble, they were elevated, they were close to the gods rather than mortal, so you get a mixture of mortality and a sort of relationship to eternity almost. is a drawing which is in the Courtauld collection, small drawing, called The Dream from 1533. And again, Michelangelo, kind of very close relationship to Greek. You go to the the British Museum, there's a figure which is like this in the Greek collection. And finally, so drawing as the basis of painting. So someone tell me about Leonardo and drawing.
I guess he did a lot of drawings that were very analytical. So of, let's say, of the human body, or the circulatory system, or cadavers.
So it's one of the first to actually involve actively in cutting up cadavers to do drawings. So the first artist to really chart the inner body.
Michelangelo was doing that too, though, wasn't he?
Yeah, the Renaissance, they all started to go into the morgue but it was
sort of sorry,
go on.
I was just saying there's something kind of cartoon like about the 1 second left to me. You know, it's kind of almost verging into sort of caricaturing.
He did a lot of very expressive drawings of different facial types. So his expressive range is quite pronounced.
He was also one of the first ones that depicted reality without using a certain canon. Like, I wouldn't necessarily say cartoonish, but like more reality-based, and he was not afraid of revealing ugly old age rather than beautifying them.
So his scientific method drew him into empiricism and observation. So he was part working as a scientist, part working as he changed his intellectual framework according to what task was at hand. But he had a wide range of methods.
Is there a particular scale that he was working to when he's doing all of those sort of drawings where he's figuring things out and all those sort of scientific?
So the notebooks.
Yeah, what sort of size were they?
They're small. I mean, not like ordinary notebooks we have today. No bigger than A4, but usually smaller.
So incredible detailing.
He never stopped drawing. He wrote in a mirror, so he wrote upside down, so he couldn't read readily what he wrote. So it's like a total drawing of the universe in the end.
And he also worked for some duke. Was it Padua? I can't remember. And they invented like all these kind of war machines.
And he worked for Milan. He worked
Milan.
at Milan.
Right.
And he finished up in France, the King of France.
Okay.
He never, I mean, a lot of the time he didn't finish projects.
And how extensive is the collection in the royal collection that the king would know?
The collection is incredible. I mean, it's one of the biggest collections of Leonardo drawings in the world, if not the largest collection. I mean, it's stupendous. I mean, a lot of doctors today are astounded by how close he got to in his observation. And towards the end of his life, he did these apocalyptic drawings. The small drawings, there's about 10 or 12 of them in the Royal Collection, which depict the end of the world or the apocalypse. It was also attempted to get into the energetics of the world, the sort of chaotic principle, the dynamic principle. But they're some of the greatest imaginative drawings I think there are in the history of art. So Raphael. How do you locate Raphael in conjunction with Leonardo and Michelangelo?
I feel he is more gentle.
Yes.
And the subject matters locate more on women.
He died very young. He died in his 30s. Whereas Michelangelo lived into his, I think it was into his 80s. So I think his first drawing was between the age of 13, 14, 15, something like that. But it was already accomplished when he was a boy.
His faces for me and his characters always feel much more idealized.
They're much more idealized, much more fanciful and poetic and drifting and elsewhere. In the 19th century, he was seen as the greatest artist that ever lived. And he commanded incredible prices for his art, incredible. But he went out of fashion in the 20th century. In a way, you can see why. It's Raphael. This is Dürer. I think he was 13 when he drew this. And very much in the manner of Leonardo. So he's Northern European, but he traveled to Italy and absorbed ideas of the Renaissance. The bottom portrait of the old woman is his mother. What does that suggest, that drawing? Certainly it's not idealistic, it's not idealized, it's realistic.
Poverty.
And it's a woman,
This
an
is
old woman.
his mother.
Cachexia. The skin bone. Probably has a disease.
I wonder what's the text on these two drawings? Is that signature or anything more? I think it's 1514. It's a time, and there's some sentence.
Yeah, I can't answer that. This is Dürer, sketches of animals and landscapes. So we get in the later part of the Renaissance, this observational culture, this documenting of all things which are, so plants, animals. It's the first time they saw a lot of these animals which came from remote parts of the earth, particularly Africa.
Is that? I was just saying, is that? Maybe I misremember this. I saw the Dürer show. Where was it? The National Gallery. But they had work for the artists. Is that later career Dürer? So I remember there was quite a few paintings of the sort. There was a lot of lions going on, but they were very obviously like, you know, sort of, the artist hadn't seen one before, so it was like a, you know, kind of dog-like with a mane.
Yeah,
I can't remember whether it was Dürer or
all
not.
came from stories of travelers.
Yeah,
but in Padua there was a zoo with the Gonzaga family, and Titian, when he painted Bacchus and Ariadne, did paintings of the cheetahs. They're very realistic. So he actually observed cheetahs in the court of the Gonzaga family. So we shift from Renaissance drawings to the Baroque period. And what is the main difference between this drawing and the previous drawings?
I think the previous drawing are trying to show the like true appearance of the different characters, but for this painting, so for this drawing, I think the artist focus more on the lines and the rhythm and the shade color.
So it's almost calligraphic.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, in a way, it's just from the optical much more into the haptic, into the touch feel of the drawing, the movement of the drawing. So it's a movement image.
Yes, the rendering of the image gets much simpler, dynamic, I guess, strong lines, that sort of thing.
Rembrandt produced numerous etchings and drawings in order to meet the demand for his work. His drawings have a calligraphic immediacy to them, combining line and ink washes. Amongst his drawings is a copy he produced of the Mughal emperor. So it's sort of a recording of the relationship of the hand and the nervous energy, as much as a depiction of or a portrait of a figure. A certain sense of autonomy of the line as well. The line becomes independent of form. Rembrandt. A very rapid drawing process. This is a Mughal miniature. This is from the 16th, 17th century, about the time of late Renaissance, Mannerist period. But you can see there's a fusion between European influence of drawings. They saw a great deal of Renaissance prints in the Jesuit priests often brought small paintings and drawings and etchings of the Renaissance. There's also Persianate elements and obviously local Hindu miniature elements, but it's the heart of a hybrid, very fine. If you go to the V&A, some of the Mughal drawings are really fabulous. So this is Baroque drawing. This is an artist called Gorsino. Again, you get this great sense for movement and a sort of graphic shorthand. It's trying to convince you of the passion as much as the appearance. So one of the most brilliant draftsmen of the Baroque period is distinguished by rapid calligraphic strokes of the pen, which are combined with cross-hatching and dots. So in a way, I say the difference between Renaissance in very general terms is you get a more static, more refined, mimetic sense of drawing, kind of sculptural drawing. But with the Baroque, you get a movement image, a dynamic image, almost haptic, the touch feel of things. Same artist.
Sorry, Jonathan, which artist was this?
I think it's pronounced Gorsino.
Okay.
Same artist. But one of the greatest draftsmen of the 17th century is Rubens. His drawing style was both dynamic and emotionally intense, exploring the full range of the Baroque sensibility. So getting this relationship to movement, to intensity, and to dynamism, and to emotional excess. Rubens. Again, this movement, dynamism. Moving to the Rococo period, this is Watteau series. It's a much lighter emotional touch, which was characterized by the art of the Baroque. So Baroque is more dynamic, more sensuous. This is much lighter in its feeling, sweeter, more courtly. This is interesting. It was Alexander Colosens. It's the 18th century, and he experimented with blots. So he threw ink onto the paper and tried to discover landscapes within the blots. So it's very close to a method employed in China with thrown ink and with an artist like Sessue in Japan in the 15th century. So this is a kind of really wild experimentation on a small scale that really basically pre-runner of abstract expressionism. Very important, little explored passage in English watercolor painting. And in contrast to Colosens, there's this drawing by Ong, which influenced early Matisse and early Picasso in their classical neoclassical rendering of figures, line drawings. This is Goya. So we're beginning to see almost a cartoon-like element entering into a drawing style of artists like Goya. So this is painted by Cézanne in the 15th century. It was a painting which was given to his student as a mark of his enlightenment. It's what's called broken or splashed ink style. And it's remarkable for the 15th century. We identify this type of drawing with modernism. It's 18th century Zen drawing. But in a way it prefigures the modernist abstraction. Circle, triangle, square. One of the greatest draftsmen of the 19th century, East and West, is Hokusai. Why would I claim that? Who knows the drawings of Hokusai? Who've seen his notebooks, his drawing.
Well, I've seen the prints, not so much the drawings. Hiroshige and Hokusai. I mean, the two.
Thousands of drawings.
Sorry?
You did thousands of drawings. Obviously, the prints like the wave are much more celebrated. But it's almost like he was on the edge of animation, doing multiple drawings of the same figure, different postures, different poses. And he had a tremendous influence on particularly Van Gogh and Degas. He lived a very long life, and he said, when he got to about the age of 90, he said, I'm just about getting good at drawing. So he did all these sheets of studies of birds and people bathing. And in a way, this relationship to Japanese drawing techniques and Japanese composition in woodblock prints revolutionized an artist like Van Gogh, who felt he was Japanese. He said, I'm Japanese. A great sense of energetics, of movement, of a sort of pulsation going through the whole rendering of the scene. As if it's dancing alive with energy. A very rapid movement of the pen. So in relationship to the calligraphic feeling of line. Certainly gestural. Drawing can be understood as forming a close relationship to the nervous system. And as such, it's the most intimate passage of the inside and outside of the subject. In turn, this accumulative serves as a form of memory system of a period. As an inscriptive system, it is close to writing, and notebooks invariably mix these two registers into close relation, as exemplified by, in this case, Gauguin. So in his notebooks, he had drawings and photographs of sculpture. So the way he developed the modern notebook, artist notebook, Stego, multiple studies of a single figure or a group of figures. But this idea of doing studies of different angles, different points of view, came from artists like Hokusai.
And it's interesting, Jonathan, with those drawings, how closely they match up with the feeling of the sculptures that we've seen in the Courtauld on our visits.
Yeah. But really dynamic. So again, this movement image. This is Sora, who did these very detailed studies of prefigured his paintings. The late Cézanne drawing. I want to talk about these late watercolors, late drawings he did. What was he aspiring towards?
They seem more fragmentary and suggestive, so that you have to piece it together in your own mind rather than having it spelled out for you.
So in a way, he suggests the relationship between mind and matter. The perception is very close to the object of attention, or is a continuum.
And even in his painting of landscape of the areas that he was spending his last years, it really moved away from the depiction of nature surrounding to almost abstract forms of colors and shapes just around the areas.
It's almost like they pulsate to get the rhythms of natural shapes and forms.
Can I just ask a question about Cézanne?
Yeah.
Why was he so famous when he was just doing some like landscape observation?
I mean, he's famous because he prefigures in the schema of modernity, modern art. So without Cézanne and his pursuit of the geometry of nature and the sensation of nature, you wouldn't have had Cubism. Also, the story goes.
But Jonathan, wouldn't it be fair to say in Cézanne's case, it's not so much his drawings, which are exquisite drawings, but rather it was his use of color and his interpretation and overlay of color onto nature that took it to a different place than what had been done before?
I think there's multiple reasons. I mean, his relationship to geometry is very important. It's the sort of inner structure of landscape. So it's different from idealism of the Renaissance, a different relationship between appearance and essence that he figured out. And it's almost like it captures the movement between space and time. So the landscapes tremble, they're not static. So again, it's a different sort of relationship to movement image. is Matisse. Where did this come from? It seems very abrupt. Suddenly it's drawn by Matisse. How did Matisse get to where he wants to go with drawing?
I mean, it looks like a process of reduction.
So we get reduction and condensation.
Also the flatness of the final product. His drawing painting that of course we learn and understand, and we move away from that. His total, say, he abandoned perspective. Everything is in flat visual surface rendering presentation sort of thing.
So we get in the late 19th century, early 20th century, is moving away from mimesis. And this new gestalt, this new dynamic gestalt where figure and ground are sort of mixed together. In drawing, the architectural project. So what's this a study of? Probably the most famous painting.
Damoiselle d'Avignon.
Daniel. And he did the most. I don't think there's any painting in the history of art which has exceeded the number of studies that Picasso did for it. It takes a book you can have a whole book on just this one painting with all the studies. And eventually it takes us to synthetic cubism. Could someone talk about this drawing?
So it's like synthetic cubism. So it's like rather than just analyzing and just sort of dissecting with cubism, it's like building up, building something in layers, and so this kind of spatial layering. Then after this, it went more into color and texture again.
Yeah.
Like,
and also multiple perspective. We discussed like a flatness of rendering before, but now from cubism, now it's all multiple perspective is added, isn't it?
So you get the articulation of form, but there's planes and folds, and it flattens out. Very refined drawing. Modigliani. Another artist who spent a great deal of time drawing. Why the stylization?
At the time, sorry.
Okay.
At the time, there was a huge exposure to African arts and what they called primitive arts. And I think, all artists were inspired, including Picasso, Modigliani. and that also involves masks, objects, and that kind of chunky, quite flattened figure.
Very refined line, though, isn't it? Why the refinement?
It feels like it's summarizing the whole figure into some abstract lines, and then it is also about some exaggeration of certain part about the movement.
Has an interesting relationship to the sheet of paper, doesn't it?
Mm.
I mean, spatially, it's really exact, the drawing and the composition of the drawing and the design of the drawing.
I think also when you take the word caryatid, which used to be like a classicist carrier, like there were caryatids that were carrying, I think it was in the Parthenon. They had a very classicist figural rules, also in terms of proportion, in terms of how they would hold the structure. So that's like a breaking a mold in a way when it comes to the caryatids as well.
So it's a meeting point between almost the classical and the primitive. The elegance is partly classical. The condensation is African, or even pre-archaic. Could be archaic sculpture from the classical world. I mean, much more the feeling of autonomy of form as well, purity of form. So it could be a sculptural figure as much as a painted figure. I mean, in fact, this drawing is closer to the condition of sculpture than to painting. George Gross. So Dada explosion in Berlin. This is taking it away from Modigliani, certainly away from the refinements of synthetic cubism. What are the elements? How would you describe the drawing?
I would say it's a critique of modernism, because the people are still like designed by sort of mathematical proportion. But it's a critique because it's all he just paints for is degenerating society.
So it's often said to be both a futurist and a cubist. So there's a great sense of animation and shorthand, graphical shorthand. It also captures a sense of nightlife and crowds and sort of degeneration.
I think at this point in time in Berlin, it was sort of like the cabaret culture.
Yeah.
Post World War I and before World War II, where people like Gross and Otto Dix became the sort of like the zeitgeist and captured this kind of macabre, ridiculous, dark side of urban life, which included prostitution, drinkers, and it was almost like the kind of the faux pas of societal life.
I mean, it's like that figure sitting at the table, woman sitting at the table. She's naked. So it's as if he moved from, and the central figure, the drawing, where it's almost a violence against the figure, the drawing itself is both a depiction and a correction. So it does a double nose, a double chin.
It's almost feeling Bacon-esque, the way it's sort of, you feel like the figure's kind of, you've got a double take on it, sort of swerving or turning to you.
So a relation with drawing and violence.
Yeah, depravity as well.
Defiguration.
But it's also drawing and depression, really, because in order to draw like that, one really has to have a certain amount of hate, as well as a certain amount of just the ridicule of day to day. Like you can't really observe it and not be in some sort of deep depression mode.
You could say it's sardonic.
Yeah.
He was a communist, or related, kind of very close to the Communist Party. And he did a lot of drawings for magazines and for the movement. He was closely associated with artists like John Hartfield, the photomontages, and often used photomontage elements in his drawings. This is Katty Kollwitz. She was incredibly influential in China in the 1920s and 30s. Influenced the woodblock movement there. Can anyone talk about this drawing? And she was very close to the communist movement, which was crushed in 1916, a year before the Bolshevik Revolution, or a year afterward, 1919.
It's really nice. It's sort of, I like the darker paper as well, you know, sort of kind of got like an underexposed quality to it. And the I don't know, it feels quite sort of modern. There's sort of something interesting going on with the paper texture as well. It kind of almost looks a little bit like pixely or like sort of video interlaced or something. It's, yeah.
She
Very
uses. Yeah.
I was going to say also the gaze and mouth, the lips, determination or a bit of emptiness, looking at the space, or a little bit of hopelessness or some sort of emotion or feeling coming from this portrait. Jonathan, before you mentioned communism, I was thinking about slight bit of anger or sort of protesting thing, quiet.
It's definitely resistance.
But again, resistance. And now that you mentioned communism, I can actually see the link. I think it's the general feeling the society around the time. With all these communist ideas, they believe that they can actually change the world somehow, and gradually see how that didn't really materialize.
This is Max Beckmann. So Egon Schiele, who's looked at a lot of Schiele's work.
I've looked at bits of it. I mean, some of it's very, very erotic. And I guess you can see traces of that in certainly the two drawings on the right.
I mean, he was one of the first artists to explicitly do drawings of masturbation.
He's also one of the Well, at this point in time, he was drawing in brothels and depicting a working class, which was not necessarily seen in his counterparts like Klimt, for example. I mean, they both kind of liberated the figure in a certain way and had this kind of expressive line, but he was going more towards the gutter when it came to the people that he drew. He was also drawing in hospitals, pregnant women. So his people were a different class to others.
So you get a closer relationship to the object in Sheila. But Klimt is more aristocratic, perhaps, and decadent.
They feel really complicated as well. They feel very intellectual and got a complicated relationship with the subject and what's being expressed. There's so much in there. There's so much to read in there.
Which English artist aspires to draw like Sheila? We had an exhibition with Sheila's work in Vienna. Tracy Emin. I think it's often a mistake to pair artists who aspire towards great artists to try and bring attention to your own drawings.
Didn't she also do one with Munch at the RA as well?
I think there's what it's Monk and Sheila. She
Okay.
aspires towards. What's happening with this drawing? How would you characterize this drawing?
It feels very intuitive. Like it doesn't really based on exact anatomy, but more expressive and a fast speed.
If you look at that arm, which goes close to the leg, I mean, the line there is wonderful, but it's not mimetic. It's just sort of graphical. I mean, it works with the flatness, flatten the. So you've got both depth to the drawing and flatness, and a sort of tension between flatness of the drawing and the depth of the drawing. You get a great deal of movement of lines, so as if the body becomes the surface for inscription. So it's both very abstract and, I mean, it's a definite figure, but it's also got autonomy as line, the face, these calligraphic marks. They give the drawing a force.
It feels like in part some of the lines would have been drawn unsighted. It feels like an unsighted drawing, but then it's clearly gone back over and made marks over the top, so it's not totally unsighted.
There is a kind of rhythm between lines which are just lines, which are rhythmical, and lines which describe. So as if it goes in and out of blindness and vision. So it's not got one focus. I mean, I've never thought about that before, but this is Klimt. Who's this?
Paul Klee.
Hmm?
Klee?
This is Kandinsky.
Oh.
I think that's what the drawings are about, the relationship between forms in nature and a language of abstract notations. He had a very close relationship to music and composition of music. And obviously it was thought about notation. And Paul Klee. So Leslie, you talked about Giacometti's drawings in a visit to the Tate. Could you repeat your observations? This is
I can't remember exactly what I said, but it was something along the lines of his drawing was an exploration of trying to find the essence of the person, and in a way, it's very reflective of the way he does the sculpture, which is a continuous iterative process. And on the drawing, actually the one we looked at, and also very similar here, there's not erasures, so parts of the body are in different places and marks are changed, and there's some, you don't see it as much on this one, but then like the head became much smaller on the drawing we looked at the Tate, and you could see, I think it was like the third iteration of the head, and it just kept getting smaller the whole time. And you can just feel the artist's hand in just looking and seeing and exploring in the drawing.
And to what effect?
I think to pull out what Giacometti felt was the essence of the person, I think, to distill it.
Has anyone else got a reading of this drawing?
It also really feels like there's an intrusion of the space into the figure, and the figure feels like it's holding its own, but it's also kind of vibrating in the space as well. So there's a real interruption, it feels like, in the different the planes. But yeah, it's a very frenetic and frantic kind of space that the figure's inhabiting.
Also feel that because of perspective of the settings sort of retreating while the figure is sort of coming towards me the more I see it. And I try not to get my understanding of Giacometti being existentialism thing, but I can't help but thinking of that putting person or human as the main thing in his work.
It's like she's held captive of the background, isn't she? She's sort of pinned to a chair while she's being attacked from all sides.
Funny how things are interpreted different way. As I said, to me, this person, even though she's sitting and sort of fixed format, it somehow seems to be coming close to me the more I read it, and the more I see it.
In fact, there's a paradox between, he invariably painted people he knew very close, his brother Diego, his mother in particular. So he had a relationship of intimacy with the characters he drew. But at the same time, there's a kind of terrible feeling of distance, of not being able to get close. So they're both close at hand, immediate, but also they're very remote, as if you can't capture the space in between. I mean, you get the feeling the drawings and the sculpture are never finished, that you can't quite solve the problem of bodies in space. And for that reason, he's always on the front cover of books on existentialism.
He's always sort of frantically on the move, isn't he? Even in the photos they take of him, he's always sort of on that diagonal, moving through the space constantly.
But Jonathan, wouldn't he be on books on existentialism because of the article that Sartre wrote on him? And that's kind of colored everybody's view of Giacometti?
I mean, it's part of that milieu. I mean, Genet wrote on him. Genet's writing is, I think, much better. Sartre came out with an amazing statement. He said, Giacometti cuts the fat out of space. I think that's one of the most memorable sayings about an artist's work in a very shorthand. I think the essay by Genet called The Studio of Alberto Giacometti is a wonderful piece of writing. I mean, it's a portrait of an artist in a studio, but also it references his trips to brothels and the sort of sense of, I mean, he had a studio which was very raw. He had enough money to move to quite a fashionable, I mean, it didn't have a loo. He used to pee into a pot. And he didn't, he wore the same clothes more or less. So he kind of lived the same life, despite the fact he became very famous and wealthy. He more or less lived the same life. That's from 1950. A group of drawings. There's a sense of incessant nervous energy. And one of the greatest drawers of notebooks was Antoine Artaud in the asylum that he was interned in. And, very much united drawing with drawing and writing. He came up with this term, the subjectile, which related to his drawing techniques, which often he drew so violently into the paper that he ripped holes in the paper and stubbed cigarettes, so made marks on the paper. So you get a kind of conjunction of subject and project or projection.
And Jonathan, wasn't it Artaud, I can't remember, was he the one who originally came up with the phrase body without organs?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Deleuze and Guattari took the term body without organs from a poem by Antoine Artaud. And Derrida took the term subjectile, wrote on the subjectile. A wonderful essay by Derrida. I was one of the great creative forces in pre-war and post-war Paris. He was an actor. He played the priest in Joan of Arc, the silent Joan of Arc. Did anyone talk about Pollock?
A phenomenological approach to drawing. So drawing with the body, interacting with your body on a painting and movement in space, particularly when he was making paintings on a horizontal surface and crawling all over them. Jonathan, I think you're on mute.
I'm not on mute.
Oh, sorry.
I'm thinking.
Oh.
I'm visible to myself anyway. I don't have my image up. I don't have any images up. Anyone else got insight into Pollock? He said, I don't paint nature, I am nature. What's meant by that?
The direct expression of nature through his body onto the canvas, in his mind anyway.
So this rhythmical, it's this sense of mind and nature are continuous, which became a theme of later philosophical understanding of cybernetics and what were some of his influences? There's a North American influence on his drawing
I mean, that he influenced or that influenced him?
that influenced him.
First and foremost, Lee Krasner.
Yeah, but he looked at Navajo sand paintings.
But do you think that's post-rationalization?
I think he'd have seen them at the time.
But Molly makes an interesting point about Lee Krasner, and that for those of us that were on the Tate visit, there was that very good Lee Krasner painting that we came across, I think, in room 2 or 3.
I thought it was a Pollock.
Yeah.
I think Juan Miro was one of his influences.
Yeah, definitely Miro and definitely definitely Picasso.
Yeah. I think he was heavily studying Picasso. I mean, you can see that in what is it? Some of the ones before he was painting, before he was pouring paint.
Yeah.
I feel Sorry. Did you finish speaking, Patrick?
Yeah.
I also feeling this is just a kind of decision making, and even this is more about movement, not really about like it's about the movement and also even choreography, I think.
Definitely close to the feeling of a dance, rhythmical dance of energy. He said, I don't know when I'm in a painting, I don't know what I'm doing. It's only when I get out of the painting that I get acquainted with what I've done. He once said to Lee Krasner, in his early abstract expressionist paintings, where he's painting in his hut, he called her and said, "What is it? Do you know what I'm doing? What, didn't know it was a painting even. Didn't know how to describe it. What is it?"
Also, it is for sure not a proclaimed image.
Mm. This is William de Kooning. Can someone read this?
The drawings that interest me most are made with closed eyes. With eyes closed, I feel my hand slide down on the paper. I have an image in mind, but the results always surprise me.
Henry Michaud. He was doing something very unusual with these drawings. What's he famous for? He took mescaline and LSD to do a lot of these drawings.
I'm not. I'd never heard of him before. It's a really lovely image, though. It's sort of, yeah, so much movement and life in it.
They certainly have an intensity.
There is poetry in his drawings, I thought.
In what way?
The repetitive sort of it's repetitive shapes and
They're
like rhyming.
they're like images about to come into being, but not yet. They're in between space.
Yeah.
Should I say psychedelic some way?
I don't think the word psychedelic was occurred at that point. Annie Alvarez. Someone read.
It is the bareness of drawing that I like. The act of drawing is what locates, suggests, discovers. At times it seems enough to draw without the distractions of color and mass. Yet it is an old ambition to make drawing and painting one.
Cy Tomlin. Cy Tomlin's work demonstrates a fluid interchange between the register of drawing and painting. There is a sense that the painter and the writer are brought together into a mobile relationship. I think it's one of the, that's what attracted Roland Barthes to write about him, with this relationship between the writerly and the painterly. There's almost this notational system in a lot of his drawings. Richard Serra, minimalist sculptor. Who's seen a show of Richard Serra's drawings?
I have.
Impressed?
Not so much, really, to be honest.
Why not? Not that you should be,
I
by the way.
be, but I like it.
No, it shouldn't be necessarily. I'm just.
No, I like his sculptures better, and they had more resonance for me than the drawings.
What sort of scale are his drawings? Are they big or are they small?
Some of them massive.
That's what I expect.
I like his drawings as a practice, something that instead of doing like a massive sculpture every day, he does something else that works in the same way. There's a lot of thought and the way they work together in an installation. I like it's more
made his own unique space for drawing. They're very distinctive. Anyone guess who this is?
Rosie Emma?
It could be
Joseph Beuys.
Joseph Beuys. Those boys. There's quite a few who went to the Boyce draw when we went to the West End to visit. We saw the Boyce drawings. Did someone talk about the Boyce drawings we saw?
I feel his drawing is like his thinking process, the recording of his thinking process.
Yeah, they feel almost on little scraps of paper, as if they never intended to be presented as works in themselves.
Yeah, always from a scratchy paper or notebook.
Did someone read this?
Louise Bourgeois said, "To be an artist, you need to exist in a world of silence." Her drawings function as the starting point for the immersion into silence through which things start to appear.
I don't know what, maybe this influenced me, but my next PowerPoint is on silence. Has anyone been influenced by drawings?
I have.
In what way?
Well, I was interested in her drawings of the body and the house in House Maison.
Mm.
Enclosure within the body. So I made quite a few works around that. That's a big sculpture. I've read quite a lot of her stuff.
Very raw and visceral.
Yeah, there's a. I think she describes herself as an existentialist, and everything is kind of embodied, and there's a deep-rooted emotion for all of those gestural lines, which often relates right back to her youth and her relationship to her father and her mother. She used to ring the family owned a family made silk, was it? I don't know, some material, I forget now. And they used to have to wash it in the river. And so this ringing of the cloth, that tightening. It's also a metaphor for wringing her mistress's neck, who her father was having an affair with.
Beecher Solomons. We can come back to some of these drawings. Robert Morris produced an experimental group of drawings whilst blindfolded. They were titled Blind Time. And Schumann was drawing and performance linked together. The final drawing was exhibited with a video recording of the event. Anyone seen the Barbican exhibition?
Mortar. A whole in 2 seconds. It's the mortar, which is in the right.
Can't hear. The Solar Witch. Solowitz started his drawing practice by producing instructions for wall works, which became increasingly more complex and larger. Drawings by Sigmar Polke. I'll go through these fairly quickly now so that we can get a discussion overall later. This is Bryce Marden. He was influenced by Chinese calligraphy, and in particular, a series of poems called Cold Mountain. Jean-Michel Basquiat started as a street graffiti artist, but quickly became a huge figure in the 80s art scene with a style based on graphical immediacy. It's the artist Santiago Sierra, who drew a tattooed line on people he paid for in Old Havana. 6 unemployed men in Old Havana were hired for $30 in exchange for being tattooed. So it's a commentary about labor, but also about minimalism and conceptualism. This is William Kettridge drawing the triumphs and laments of the procession silhouette as part of an extended project to reconfigure South African history. So there's an exhibition recently in the Royal Academy. This is by the artist Ellen Gallagher. An experiment of unusual opportunity from 2008 explores the gross injustice of a medical experiment conducted in 1932 to test the effects of syphilis on 399 black men denied treatment to facilitate the study. Region King Mountain 2009. He's an artist, partner of Julian Simmons, Orbital Drawings. This was 2015. His partner Sarah Lucas. He produced these very refined circular drawings. There's Enrico David. He says, drawing is a space between something not being and its coming into presence. Jenny Saville, multiple studies of a face. Jane Savile. Someone read this out. Sharon, you're a good reader.
Sure. The registration of inscriptive practices has been open to many registers, such as the optical and haptic, the sculptural, static, and the mobile, the calligraphic and the diagrammatic, the schematic and immersive. But perhaps the present culture is one of being faced by the machinic, as opposed to the manual, as the greatest point of distinction. The question of the drama of recording of the visible and making visible is also related to how lines are drawn between objects and subjects. So, in the most abstract sense, the future of drawing relates both to how lines are drawn as both visibility, but also as a way of mapping the invisible contours of the future.
So, my first question is, what is your relationship to drawing, your personal relationship to drawing? And what have you taken from this scanning of quite a big period of time, quite a lot of stylistic and stylistic difference? What is the future of drawing? And why has drawing been so marginalized within the art school? Go on. It's your space.
Can I comment or?
Your space. Go ahead.
I think personally, I really identify with André Masson in the sense of automatic drawing. And I think each person can interpret this individually, and I find it very liberating because it would not work. When I think of automatic drawing, it will not manifest itself the same way that André Masson's would, because his line was very liquid and ink and quite sort of, I suppose, sexual. But I think that it's a good way for me to think of it as a kind of preparation that is devoid of like final result. Of course, at the end, it could be a final result if you want it to stand on its own. But it's liberating to think that it's a preparation for something else. And in that sense, it could be anything.
Would you characterize it as being immersive drawing? Or
yeah.
Or a combination?
Immersive, but I tend to think the reason why I really love drawing, and I think it's like my first sort of go-to as a kind of like my most direct medium, it's because I find it very relaxing. And I think that when I think of it as the kind of the closest to André Masson, it's probably because it's the most sort of immediate. It's like that connection between your eye, hand, brain, and it creates a fluidity in a way that's quite individual. So I think anyone would express it the way that they're built, in the sense of their kind of artistic built.
Do you find, another question, do you think it's close to the nervous system? Close to the nervous system?
I do, yeah. I think it's kind of like it encapsulates a person's view of the world as an artist. So I find it quite immediate.
I guess I come at drawing from a slightly different angle, because having trained as an architect, and I grew up as an architect before the age of computers, so when you drew by hand. And one of the things that all architects, kind of my generation and before, develop is a connection eye, hand, brain, and what it feels like in a space and what you actually draw on a piece of paper. And you have and it takes years to get it, but you get a very, very physical connection between a space and what you draw. And so I'm attracted. I guess that's why I picked out the drawing when we were at the Tate of Giacometti's drawing. It's kind of a loosely similar approach of feeling a space with the drawing. The way that Giacometti explored, let's say, a figure, his brother or his mother, in the case of what we saw tonight.
How does it affected though your way of thinking spatially when you switch from drawing by hand, where you've learned that skill, to drawing on CAD kind of programs? And
well, I equate it, and I mean Thomas probably has a different view on this, but I equate drawing on CAD to learning how to drive a car backwards at speed using the rear view mirror. It's not intuitive, but it's a different tool, and you can do different things. But it's just, I'm just saying, for me, that's how, and for architects of a previous generation, there's that immediate eye-hand brain coordination, and from being in the field and dealing with buildings, you learn a sense of scale very quickly. So when you draw on a piece of paper, you can draw to scale, and you know in your body what that means in space.
so would young architects who have never had that experience of drawing by hand have a different understanding of the way in which they're designing space and working?
They do, and I mean, I can't speak for Thomas and his classmates, but we used to hire a lot of young architects, and very few of them could draw very well by hand. And it really took, there's some notable exceptions, but on the average, the drawing skills by hand have decreased. But then some pick it up as they go along. But, the visualization skills of young architects is off the charts in terms of what they can do with computers. So but that's a different discussion.
Yeah, I think shorthand.
After Thomas.
I think like the shorthand sketches is kind of lost. Sorry, my voice is destroyed. The shorthand sketches has been lost in people in my generation. Where I worked in a really, really big firm before my master's, and the older architects would come around and do sketches for us to produce. They'd do it so quickly and so precisely. And it'd be a cut through a wall, but it would all be in the right proportion. And I think people in my generation can't do that as well. But then the use of CAD is a drawing technique, but it's not part of the nervous system, I find. I find it very disconnected. And you don't understand the sense of space when you actually produce it.
Just expand the scope a bit. I'm reading quite a bit of neurological related books these days, psychology and all that, and also even the drawing. So start to reread and actually do the practice again with this one. And you would have heard about the different part of brain with the language and the special sort of thing, numbers and language and etc. This book is focusing on learning to draw, not thinking about eyes and nose, but just the shapes and lines and shade, that sort of thing. And I really find it helpful. Going back to what Molly says a bit earlier, most artists would have this zone, the flow thing. Once you're in the right mode, then you just go, you lose the track of time and you just continue doing things. And I think that's how different part of brain, and when it comes to drawing, either is rendering of what's out there or what's in your mind, etc. I think it's the sort of gaining access to that part of brain also helps.
When we've been doing visits, like to the Wallace Farm, particularly I remember the Wallace, but also the Courtaulds has got a big collection of drawings. But there's often a sort of distinct admiration for Baroque drawings, particularly Rubens's drawings. Why do you think that is? Why do you think there's an uptake on certain graphical artists of a period within the modern So often there's an admiration for Rubens' oil sketches or drawings, which are not often the case with his paintings.
Is it because the audience can see a direct translation between that immediate kind of, as you said, as we're talking about, sort of like putting it to paper, bringing it into reality, putting it to paper, and then translating it from that into a more finished piece?
I mean, it could also be that it just resonates with current trends. Let's say taking the Rubens oil sketches.
Yeah, it's got a timely quality to it.
I think if you look at how Rubens was read at the time of his success, because he was obviously hugely successful and was hired to do paintings rather than drawings because it was valued. He drew by the canon of the time. And so he was obeying certain rules when he was painting, which he let go of when he was drawing. So the drawings have value today because we see them post, Rembrandt or other artists that kind of release the soul. So we see the kind of the meaning in the drawings, but in the big paintings, they lose what we would find genuine today in modern times. But it doesn't mean that he was less great or less of a brilliant painter. It just means that he was just of the time.
Often the paintings were a studio production as well. I mean, he would come along and do the faces and hands and bits of highlights. So often they were painted in the manner of Rubens as much as by Rubens. I mean, not in every case, but he did such an enormous output that he had to have a studio to generate all the paintings. A great deal of painting is by assistance, whereas the drawings were his hand always distinctly. What do you remember of the transition between Renaissance drawing and Baroque drawing? What do you think brought about that transition?
Perspective is the obvious, an obvious thing to say, but I'm sure there's more to it than that.
But just that addition of emotion, really. That sort of there was, yeah. We got up to that point where it was very highly sort of stylized and idealistic, and then we sort of went headlong into all that emotional kind of output, I think, through the drawing.
A relationship.
Sorry. I think that the Renaissance put the man in the center, but Baroque was obviously more ornamental, so that you see how the line gets looser. And it becomes more about linear rather than the actual accuracy of the man in the center of the picture.
It's a decentered universe. So in the Renaissance, we have a human-centered culture, whereas in the Baroque they begin to work out that the human was not the center of the universe.
I think there's more than just that, right? It's some type of perfection that they were, which relates back to Greek time, that they were trying to reproduce, which isn't in the Baroque. They're actually reacting against that. They're trying to bring it down to earth. So it's to do with the representation of, you call it God if you like. It's been brought down to the masses, off eye. So the lines all change and the faces all change, and and as a consequence of that, there is no longer a center. Or not the same center. It's a different way of telling a story. God isn't the center, or the human isn't the center, whichever way you want to look. And that's because they try to popularize things in a way that they didn't try and popularize things in the past. to do with the masses as much as anything as well, because the church needed to get people to come to church because it was unpopular at that time because of the, what was going on with the Lutherans. The Catholics were nervous they were losing support, so they employed people to change the way they're depicted.
And I know we've discussed it in the past that I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. Hito Steyerl,
Yeah.
The free fall, the article on perspective, and that's the change in view on that, which I think is what you were touching on, Jonathan, there about man being the center of the universe in the Renaissance and so forth.
A certain view of perfectibility of the human as well. But you get a speeding up of time and a more dynamic relationship between space and time within the Baroque. Hence this movement image.
I think they also became fascinated with mirrors and hallucinatory images. That's a big thing in that time.
It's interesting, Lester, because you talked about about perspective. And I just looked up when it was invented, and apparently it was devised about 1415 by an architect, Filippo Brunelleschi.
Who's also famous for his dome in Florence there.
And also worked with the sculptor, Donatello. Donatello worked with him.
That was the Renaissance time, right?
Uccello is very early to understand the perspectival forms.
I have to say your presentation tonight's just made me want to start drawing on a much more regular basis again, because I really miss it. Actually, it's great to see, I don't know, just all the different approaches and the different ways artists have used it to run alongside their practice. It's really inspiring.
Jonathan, if you were the dean of an art school, would you encourage drawing?
Oh, I think the drawing should be center without it being fetishized. I think drawing can be conceived both as physical drawing, but a way of understanding conceptually drawing, what drawing is. The passage from there not being to there being something. So a philosophical grasp of drawing as much as a physical grasp of drawing. Unfortunately, I went to the Slade where there was a strong drawing tradition, and I was caught up in conceptual art and abandoned drawing and painting at the age of 18. And I'm mourning the loss of drawing skills in my life. I think it also does something to the brain and to the body. So I don't think drawing should be abandoned. I think there's a dangerous move towards computerization of everything. I think drawing's a corrective to that. And it's a refinement of the nervous system, a refinement of the soul, a refinement of the relationship of the body to the world. I think it adds to the respect that people have for each other. I don't know how. It's a statement off the top of my head, but I'm going to make it.
It's true. Drawing feels so honest and so vulnerable and so open somehow. And maybe it is because it's that first touch to the paper, that first expression of what it is that we're trying to explore, trying to emotionally convey.
It sort of fills what words can't tell. It goes beyond that. Words are so limited.
I mean, drawing goes right back to the cave, and it comes before writing.
Yeah.
Quite measurably before writing.
Wasn't it Hockney who said, he said, if I can paint it, why would I write it or something?
I wonder, did you notice people left out who should be in?
Dormier?
Dormier, yes.
I really like the way Picasso plays with, like his, you remember the ones with a bull, the way he distorts something and turns it. And that's quite an illustration of a way of drawing, which I find very interesting. You know the ones I'm talking about.
Yeah, they were in an exhibition in Gaussian not so long ago.
I mean, it's wonderful just the way, you know, you come back to this painting, they're drawing again every day. You see it adapt.
If there's a workshop on drawing, what could we do? Not immediately, but do you think we should do a workshop on drawing, and maybe drawing and writing even?
You could do something around, I mean, like to talk to Anya's point earlier, like, yeah, is there an exercise to be done in terms of trying to convey the same information through words and writing? As a sort of an investigation of the sort of extents and limits of the two.
For me, it's a way of thinking. It's mind expanding.
So you draw every day?
Almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it come into medicine?
I draw to explain things to my patients. And I can convey, I draw the human body and the muscles and the bones just quickly, just very simply, so that they understand why they have pain, where it comes from, where the nerves are. It's so fast, it explains things to them in a way they can really grasp it and understand it, much more than words. I can start using words and I can see them
blanking.
They're lost. And as soon as I